Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're performing, well, basically an autopsy,
An autopsy on a word,
right?
really.
A word that I think is effectively on life support in the corporate world right now.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you see it plastered on every PowerPoint deck, every annual report, every team meeting agenda you've ever sat through. But 9 times out of 10, it means absolutely nothing.
And that word, of course, is strategy.
Strategy. It just sounds so serious, doesn't
It
it?
does. It sounds expensive.
Yes, exactly. It sounds like something only the people in the corner office get to do.
Yeah.
But today we are diving into Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard P. Rumelt. And my very first takeaway from reading this material is that Rumelt is basically the angry chef of the business world.
The angry chef. I love that.
Right. He walks into the kitchen, tastes the soup everyone is making, and just starts screaming that it's nothing but hot water.
That is a surprisingly accurate description of him. Rumelt is a giant in this field. I mean, he's been studying this stuff since the 1970s.
Wow.
Yeah. And his main argument here is that we are currently suffering from a massive contagion of what he calls bad strategy.
And just to clarify for everyone listening, he's not talking about strategies that were, well-reasoned but just didn't work out because of bad luck or market shifts.
No, not at all. He's talking about a very specific type of intellectual dysfunction. It's where leaders essentially fool themselves into thinking they have a plan when all they really have is a wish list.
Which brings us to the mission for this deep dive. Because for you, the listener, we want to strip away all that corporate fluff. We want to really understand what Rumelt calls the kernel of good strategy.
And honestly, this isn't just for CEOs.
No.
Whether you're managing a team, running a household, or just planning your own career, you really need to know the difference between a goal and an actual strategy.
Exactly. And we've got some heavy hitters to look at today to prove his points. We're going to revisit Steve Jobs saving Apple in 1997.
A classic.
Right, and spoiler alert, it wasn't because of some magical visionary genius moment. We'll also look at the left hook of Desert Storm, and we'll discuss a concept that honestly really surprised me. The idea that positive thinking might actually be the enemy of success.
That one usually catches people off guard.
It really threw me for a loop. But let's start with the diagnosis here. Rumelt says bad strategy isn't just an accident. It's a syndrome.
A syndrome with 4 very specific hallmarks.
Right. So let's unpack this for everyone. What is the very first symptom of the disease?
The first one is fluff.
Fluff. I feel like I encounter this daily.
Oh, we all do. It's exactly what it sounds like. It is a superficial restatement of the obvious, just dressed up in complex jargon to create this illusion of high-level thinking.
Right.
Rumelt actually tears apart a retail bank's strategy statement in the book.
Right.
It said something along the lines of, our fundamental strategy is one of customer-centric intermediation.
Customer-centric intermediation. Which, if you translate that back to plain English, just means we are a bank, we take deposits, and we lend money.
Exactly. But by dressing it up in those big Sunday words, the leadership completely avoids the hard work of actually saying something specific.
It masks a complete lack of substance.
Yeah, it's intellectual laziness hiding behind a thesaurus. But, while fluff is annoying, the second hallmark is actually dangerous. Rumelt calls it the failure to face the challenge.
So this is the idea that if you don't define the actual problem, you literally cannot solve it.
Correct. And Rumelt uses the story of International Harvester to illustrate this beautifully. Back in the day, they were a massive agricultural manufacturer. I mean, ranked right up there with the biggest companies in America.
But they were failing.
They were failing badly. The executives kept producing these strategic plans to strengthen the brand or improve teamwork or increase innovation.
Which, I mean, those sound like good things, right? Who doesn't want better teamwork?
They are good things in a vacuum, but they weren't the problem. The actual problem was that International Harvester had a labor contract and a cost structure that was totally unsustainable compared to their competitors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were bleeding cash on literally every single tractor they built. But discussing labor relations was painful. It was politically difficult within the company.
So they just ignored the iceberg and focused on rearranging the deck chairs instead.
Exactly.
So bad strategy is often just denial dressed up as a plan. You treat the symptoms because looking at the disease is just too scary.
Precisely. Or it's the third hallmark, which I honestly think is the one most of us are guilty of.
Mistaking goals for strategy. I
Yes.
see this constantly. Someone says, our strategy is to grow revenue by 20% next year, or our strategy is to be the #1 provider in the region.
That is not a strategy. That is an ambition. It's a wish.
Right.
Rumelt uses a great analogy here. If you tell me I want to run a marathon,
That's a goal.
that's a goal. A strategy is the training regimen, the diet plan, the sleep schedule, and the pacing chart that actually gets you across the finish line.
But in business, leaders so often stop at the goal. They stand on stage, they announce the 20% growth, everyone claps.
But they haven't explained how. They just assume the how is going to magically happen if the goal is inspiring enough.
And that leads right into the fourth hallmark, right?
Right.
Bad strategic objectives.
Yeah, this is when the goals themselves are just impractical, or they completely fail to address critical issues. It's that sort of everything everywhere all at once approach.
So if these mistakes are so glaringly obvious, fluff, denial, wishful thinking, why is bad strategy so incredibly common? Does Rumelt think it's just incompetence? Or is there something deeper going on?
He says it's actually much deeper than incompetence. It fundamentally comes down to human nature. The first root cause is simply the avoidance of work.
Because real strategy is hard?
It is incredibly taxing mentally. You have to analyze the situation, dig into the raw data, find the leverage points. It is so much easier to just buy a corporate template.
Like the classic vision, mission, values, fill in the blanks exercise?
Precisely. It feels like you're doing work, but it's just administration. But the deeper, honestly more insidious cause, and this is where it gets really fascinating, is the unwillingness to choose.
And this brings us to the Digital Equipment Corporation story. DEC. This one was wild to me because they were a tech giant. They were essentially the Google of their day when it came to servers and mini computers.
They were massive. But in the early 90s, the market was rapidly shifting. PCs were taking over, and DEC needed a totally new direction. So the CEO, Ken Olsen, gathers his top executives to form a new strategy.
Right.
But here was the problem. One group of execs wanted to focus purely on building chips. Another group wanted to focus on the boxes, the computers themselves.
And then a third group wanted to pivot entirely to services.
Exactly. A classic boardroom brawl. Everyone fighting to protect their own turf.
Right. Now, a real strategist would look at that and say, we have to pick the winner and cut the losers. We cannot afford to do all three.
But Ken Olsen didn't want to alienate his team. He wanted consensus. He wanted everyone to be happy. So the so-called strategy they released was a compromise. They announced they would be a high-quality provider of chips, boxes, and services.
They just decided to do everything.
And by doing everything, they did nothing well. They bled resources in 3 different directions and eventually just collapsed. Rumet's whole point here is that strategy is primarily about what you're not going to do.
It requires sacrifice.
Yes. If you aren't actively killing good ideas to focus on the best idea, you don't have a strategy.
That sounds incredibly logical, but emotionally it is so hard to do. We just hate closing doors.
We really do.
Speaking of mindset, let's talk about the new thought movement that Rumelt heavily critiques. This is the positive thinking trap we teased earlier. Why does he hate positive thinking so much? It sounds almost like he's just being a curmudgeon.
To be fair, he doesn't hate optimism. Optimism is fine. He hates the belief that the mind alone can manifest reality. The idea that if you just believe hard enough and banish all negative thoughts, you will succeed.
Because in a strategic context, that is actual poison.
It is.
Because it actively encourages you to ignore the failure to face the challenge part we talked about.
Exactly. If you believe that acknowledging a legitimate threat is negative thinking, you completely blind yourself.
Yeah.
Strategy is fundamentally about solving problems.
Right.
If you refuse to look at the problem because you're too busy manifesting success on a vision board, you're going to crash your company. You need a healthy dose of paranoia to build a good strategy. You have to literally stare into the abyss to figure out how to build a bridge over it.
Okay, so we've cleared the fluff, we faced the challenge, we know what bad strategy looks like. Let's pivot to the solution. Rumelt introduces this concept of the kernel. He says good strategy isn't some 100-page document. It's a specific structure with 3 core parts.
Right. The kernel. It consists of the diagnosis, the guiding policy, and coherent actions.
Let's break these down because this is the real toolkit for everyone listening. Step 1, the diagnosis.
This answers the fundamental question, what is actually going on here? It simplifies a massively complex reality into a single critical challenge.
Like a doctor.
Exactly like a doctor. You walk into a clinic with 10 different symptoms. You have a fever, an ache, a cough. The doctor doesn't just treat the symptoms individually. They diagnose the underlying illness. They say, you have an infection.
And that diagnosis dictates literally everything else that follows.
Yes.
Rumelt uses Starbucks as an example here. Imagine you're running Starbucks and sales are dipping. A diagnosis isn't just saying sales are down. That's a symptom. You have to figure out why.
Right. One executive might look at the data and diagnose it as, our coffee quality has slipped. Another might say, the stores are dirty and the customer experience is bad.
And a third might say, we've completely overexpanded and we're cannibalizing our own foot traffic.
And here's the kicker. You can't fix all of those at once. Or at least, the fix for one might completely contradict the fix for another.
Exactly. If the diagnosis is bad coffee, you invest heavily in better beans and barista training, which costs a ton of money.
But if the diagnosis is overexpansion, you close 500 stores to save money.
Those are two completely opposite strategies.
You cannot have a strategy until you lock in on the specific diagnosis.
Okay, so let's say we have our diagnosis figured out. Step 2 is the guiding policy.
Think of the guiding policy as the guardrails. It's your overall approach to dealing with that diagnosis. It's not the detailed to-do list yet. It's the philosophy of the solution.
The IBM example was fantastic for this. Back in the early 90s, IBM was just a
It's
disaster.
a total mess. Lou Gerstner takes over. His diagnosis was that the computer industry was fragmenting, and customers were just totally overwhelmed by the complexity of it all. They didn't want to buy a hard drive from one guy and software from another. They wanted a complete solution.
So his guiding policy wasn't simply sell more computers.
No. His policy was to shift IBM from being a hardware seller to a provider of integrated customer solutions. That policy directs all the energy of the massive company. It tells every single employee we're going in this direction, not that direction. It rules out pure hardware plays. It rules out low-margin retail sales. It creates a very clear boundary.
Which perfectly brings us to the final part of the kernel, coherent actions. And this seems to be where most companies totally drop the ball. They have the catchy slogan, but the actions just don't match up.
The key word there is coherent. The actions must coordinate and actively reinforce each other. Rumelt contrasts this with Ford at one point. He noted that different divisions at Ford were actively fighting against each other.
Oh, right. One division was aggressively cutting costs on parts to save money.
Exactly. And another division was simultaneously spending millions marketing the slogan, quality is job one.
You can't have cheap, flimsy parts and claim quality as your main focus. The customer feels that disconnect immediately.
You really can't. The actions just cancel each other out. Good strategy means every single action reinforces the others. If your policy is high-end luxury, your actions are raise prices, limit supply, improve the packaging.
You don't run a massive discount sale just to hit a quarterly revenue number because that action contradicts the entire strategy.
Exactly.
I really want to apply this kernel to a real-world example that Rumelt loves to talk about, Apple in 1997. Because looking back now, we tend to think of Steve Jobs as this absolute magician, but Rumelt argues he was really just a very good strategist.
It is so easy to forget just how bad things were back then. Apple was literally weeks away from bankruptcy. Microsoft Windows absolutely ruled the world. When Jobs came back, Wall Street expected a standard corporate strategy.
Like a huge merger or a massive new technology launch to fight Windows or some billion-dollar marketing blitz.
Right. They expected massive growth. They expected a miracle.
But Jobs didn't do any of that.
No. He just applied the kernel. First, the diagnosis. Apple wasn't failing because Microsoft was unbeatable. It was failing because it had a bloated, confusing product line that was bleeding cash everywhere.
Okay, so then second, the guiding policy.
Survival through ruthless simplification.
And third, coherent actions. He took a meat axe to the company.
He really did.
He cut something like 70% of the product line, didn't he?
Even more than that. He cut the printers, the servers, the Newton. He cut it all down to a simple grid. One desktop and one laptop for pros. One desktop and one laptop for consumers. 4 squares. That was it.
It sounds so incredibly obvious now, but at the time, voluntarily shrinking a tech company must have looked like pure surrender.
It looked completely insane to the outside world. But it was entirely coherent. By clearing the decks, he stopped the cash bleed instantly. He focused their best engineers on just those 4 products, making them exceptional.
He wasn't even trying to beat Microsoft in 1997.
No, he was waiting. He created a stable platform so that when the next big wave came, which, turned out to be digital music, apple was healthy enough to actually catch it.
So good strategy very often looks like doing less, not more. It looks like saying no to almost everything.
That is a profound insight. Most bad strategy comes directly from trying to do too much.
Let's shift gears to a military example, because Rumelt uses Desert Storm to explain this concept of focused energy. This is the story of General Schwarzkopf and the famous left hook.
This is an absolute masterclass in diagnosis. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, they dug in.
They cut them off completely.
Yeah, the war was essentially over in 100 hours. But the real strategic lesson here isn't just the flanking maneuver itself, it's the internal discipline it took.
What do you mean?
To make the left hook work, Schwarzkopf had to say no to his own team repeatedly.
Yeah.
The Air Force wanted to bomb certain high-profile targets that weren't remotely relevant to the flank. The Navy wanted to launch their own massive attacks.
Everyone wanted to be the hero of the war. Everyone had their own little mini strategy.
Exactly. But Schwarzkopf suppressed all those conflicting interests. He said, no. Every single plane, every ship, every tank is serving the left hook.
He prioritized one clear plan over a diluted compromise.
If he had let everyone do just a little bit of their own plan like DEC did with the computers, the deception wouldn't have worked. The enemy would have seen the movement.
It really highlights that idea of hidden power. Rumelt talks a lot about discovering hidden strengths. He actually uses the classic David and Goliath story, but he spins it completely differently than how I learned it in Sunday school.
He really does. We usually think of David and Goliath as this ultimate story of the underdog winning through heart and sheer bravery. Rumelt says no, David won simply because he had a much better strategy.
So?
If David had tried to be a smaller Goliath, if he put on the heavy armor, picked up a heavy sword, he would have been instantly crushed. That is playing directly to the enemy's strength.
Right.
Instead, David realized he had a hidden advantage. He was a shepherd. He was an absolute expert with a sling.
And a sling back then isn't a toy.
Not at all. It's a deadly projectile weapon. It's basically bringing a handgun to a sword fight. David totally refused to play by Goliath's rules. He utilized asymmetry. He found a vulnerability, Goliath's uncovered forehead, and applied his own strength, accuracy, and range directly against it.
Gaining strength through asymmetry.
Exactly. You don't beat the massive competitor by doing exactly what they do, just slightly better.
Yeah.
You have to change the game entirely.
He applies this concept to Walmart, which I found fascinating. We think of Walmart as the Goliath now, but back in the day, they were the David. Kmart was the giant.
Kmart was 20 times the size of Walmart. And the conventional wisdom in retail at the time was you put stores in big cities where all the people are. Kmart had stores scattered randomly all over the country in high population areas.
But Sam Walton broke that rule completely. He went to these tiny little towns in Arkansas and Missouri.
He did. But the hidden power wasn't just the rural location. It was the network. Walton didn't view the individual store as the unit of business. He viewed the entire cluster of stores as the unit. By putting 10 stores near each other in a specific region, he could build one giant distribution center to feed all of them.
So he saved an absolute fortune on logistics.
Exactly. He could restock his shelves daily, whereas Kmart might take a full week to get trucks out. He managed inventory vastly better. But here is the truly brilliant part of the strategy. This utilized inertia against Kmart.
Meaning Kmart couldn't react.
Kmart saw this happening. They weren't stupid. They knew Walmart's model was vastly superior.
So why didn't they just copy it?
They literally couldn't. They already had their stores scattered completely randomly all over the map. To copy Walmart, they would have had to close their existing profitable stores and physically move them into regional clusters.
They would have had to blow up their entire company just to compete.
Exactly. Their own massive size and existing structure became an anchor. Walton used Kmart's own inertia against them.
That is a perfect example of asymmetry. It wasn't just, hey, we sell cheaper stuff. It was deeply structural.
Precisely. And this leads right into the final and perhaps most complex type of strategy Rumelt discusses, cost-imposing strategies. This comes straight out of the Cold War.
This involves Andy Marshall, right? The strategist for the U.S. government.
Right. So for decades, the U.S. strategy against the Soviets was completely reactive.
Yeah.
The Soviets build a new tank, we build a better tank. The Soviets build a new missile, we build a new missile. It was just a race, and it was incredibly expensive.
And Andy Marshall basically said, stop.
He looked at the diagnosis. The U.S. had a massive dynamic economy and incredibly high technology. The Soviet Union had a terrible rigid economy, but a whole lot of raw materials. Marshall said, why are we racing them on their terms? Let's bankrupt them.
So he shifted to strategies that didn't just provide defense for the U.S., but actively imposed a disproportionate financial cost on the Soviets.
Exactly. So, for example, the U.S. started developing these very high-tech, highly accurate stealth bombers. The primary goal wasn't necessarily to fly them into combat. The strategic goal was to force the Soviets to spend billions and billions of rubles constantly updating their air defense systems just to counter them.
Wow. So we spend $1 to make a plane, and they are forced to spend $10 to build a defense for it.
And since their economy was already weak, that forced spending just completely crippled them over time. That is high-level strategy. It's asking, where are we naturally strong and they are naturally weak, and how can we use that dynamic to make it prohibitively expensive for them to even stay in the game?
That is just brilliant. It turns the very act of competition into a lever.
It really does. And it brings us right back to the central theme of the book. Whether it's Steve Jobs saving Apple, General Schwarzkopf in the desert, or Sam Walton in Arkansas, none of them relied on fluff.
Or just sheer ambition.
Right. They didn't just want it more than the other guy. They diagnosed the actual structure of the challenge, and they applied highly focused action.
I do want to bring in a critical lens here, though, just before we wrap up today. Rumelt obviously loves this level of clarity. He loves the highly coherent, somewhat static plan. But is there a downside to this approach?
There is, and it's a very valid critique. You mentioned Clayton Christensen earlier, the author of The Innovator's Dilemma. Critics like Christensen would argue that Rumelt's view of strategy works great in a stable environment, a place where you can clearly see the whole chessboard.
But what if the chessboard is suddenly on fire?
Exactly. In highly disruptive, insanely fast-moving tech environments, having one super-focused, completely static strategy can actually be quite dangerous. Think about it. If you commit 100% of your resources to the left hook and the enemy suddenly invents teleportation, you lose instantly.
Right. So if the world shifts under your feet and you're 100% focused on the wrong thing, you go off the cliff faster than anyone else.
Exactly. So while Rumelt is absolutely correct that you need coherence and focus, you also need agility.
Mm.
You need to be able to rerun the diagnosis frequently. A strategy isn't a suicide pact.
Right.
If the underlying facts change, you have to be willing to change the diagnosis.
That's a really great nuance. It's always a balance. But I think it's fair to say that most of us out there suffer way more from the fluff side, the total lack of focus, than the too focused side.
I would agree with that completely. Most organizations today are just drowning in conflicting goals.
So let's bring this all home for you, the listener. We've gone from bad strategy, the endless wish lists, the deep denial, all the way to the kernel. What is the one thing you want people to do differently tomorrow morning?
I want you to look at your personal to-do list or look at your company's glossy strategic plan and just apply the kernel test. Ask yourself honestly, what is the actual diagnosis here? Have I truly defined the hard problem, or am I just listing nice things I want to happen?
I really look for the sacrifice.
That's the hardest part. Look at your plan and ask, what have I actively said no to? If you haven't said no to anything, if you're trying to launch 3 new products and reorganize the whole team and cut costs and radically improve culture all at the exact same time, you do not have a strategy, you just have a mess.
Are you willing to kill a good idea to focus purely on the best idea? That really is the courage of strategy.
It is, and it's exactly why good strategy is so incredibly rare.
It's a painful but absolutely necessary question to ask yourself. As always, thank you for breaking this all down with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening out there, keep diving deep.